Hello, you're listening to the Terralex podcast, where we break down current issues and trends in the legal industry. Join us as we gain valuable insights from our member law firms across the world, as well as from the in-house counsel community and experienced professionals in their field.
Thank you for joining us today. We hope that you, your families, and your teams are doing well in these very challenging times. Terralex is comprised of member firms in more than 150 jurisdictions around the world with over 20,000 lawyers. Our firms work together to address cross-border issues for clients, and in times like these, working with a globally connected local law firm is more important than ever. Joining us today, we have partners from 4 of our member firms: Rodríguez from Santamarina y Steta in Mexico, René de Sola from Tobar ZVS in Ecuador, Oscar Aitken from Carey in Chile, and Javier Verstegen from Brons y Salas in Argentina. We have just 1 hour today to cover a few topics that are challenging law firms as well as the in-house counsel community as we all work through the COVID-19 crisis. So that we can stay on schedule, our panelists have asked that I give them each a 2-minute warning during their program, but no doubt we will not have time to address every concern affecting your business, so please do submit questions during the session via the chat function or email me directly at tshannon@terralex.org, and we will work to get an answer to you right away from our local member firm. We also do have a fantastic multi-jurisdictional cross-border COVID-19 resource center at terralex.org where you can find answers to your questions. Today we begin with Andres from Santamarina y Steta in Mexico. Andres, please go ahead and take it away.
Thank you, Tim. Good morning and afternoon and evening to everyone. Thank you for your time and the opportunity. Well, just a quick reference to statistics up to last night evening. It was 3,181 cases confirmed. They have been, growing rapidly, so to speak. And unfortunately, up to last night, it was confirmed the death of 124 persons in Mexico. So, well, this is, of course, as we already know, a very serious matter. Well, a second point regarding main federal orders that set all the, let's say, the main legal framework regarding COVID-19. Well, there was a further resolution issued on March 24th, issued by the Federal Ministry of Health, declaring extraordinary actions within the national territory in order to combat the serious priority disease generated by COVID-19. Of course, there were set a list of preventive measures in order to face the virus and to try to slow down the spread of the same. Also, it was just a recommendation for people living within the Mexican Republic to avoid as much as possible to attend, working activities and social meetings or gatherings, but at that point it was just, recommended actions. It also set a list of vulnerable persons or vulnerable employees, and according to this list, we will give you further information later on. These vulnerable employees or person shall not perform any working activities at the work center and shall be granted with a paid leave of absence. Well, on March 30, the President of the Mexican Republic issued a resolution declaring the COVID-19 as a virus disease epidemic, of course, a health emergency due to force majeure. That's the, exact terminology the President used through this resolution. And instructed the Ministry of Health in order to determine all actions that may be necessary to address the emergency caused by this virus. That's in general terms what the President ordered. Later on, next day, on March 31st, the Ministry of Health issued a resolution setting extraordinary actions in order to attend the sanitary emergency generated by this virus, by COVID-19, that public, social, and private sectors must implement, and well, also set some several measures in order to face this disease. First of all, it was ordered the immediate suspension of non-essential activities from March 30 up to April 30, 2020. This with the aim of mitigating the spread of the virus. Also, there in part of the content of this resolution, it's a list of essential activities. So, companies falling or fitting within this list of activities or industries are authorized to continue in operations. I mean, of course, it is a kind of a long list. So, but some examples are of course, all those directly related or necessary to attend health emergency, such as medical, paramedical, administrative and support activities of the national health system, pharmaceutical sector, pharmacies, those involved in manufacturing inputs, medical equipment and technologies, those involved in public security and protection of citizens, of course, the administration of justice, all those, that are in fundamental sectors of economy, financial, tax collection, distributions and sale of energy, gas station, food markets, supermarkets, agro industry, chemical industry, cleaning products, telecommunications and media, private emergency services, of course, funeral and burial services, storage and cold chain services for essential inputs, logistics such as airports, ports, and railways, and some others, of course, all necessary to the conservation, maintenance, and repair of critical infrastructure, of course, drinking water, electric power, gas, oil, turbocine, basic sanitation, public transportation, hospitals, and medical infrastructure, among others that that are part of this list. In this resolution also was set a list of vulnerable employees, complementing in certain way the list that was issued on March 24 to 2020. And within this list are persons of 60 years old or elder, pregnant women, all persons that has diabetes, chronic heart or lung disease, immunosuppression, kidney or liver failure, and some other chronic illnesses. These persons shall not attend working activities, even if their employers are part of the list of essential activities. They must stay at home, and they should be granted a paid leave of absence, and they should receive full benefits. Of course, in order to on the labor and employment side, in order to try to fight or to solve the suspension of working activities and the order that the government issued on the fact that every employee should receive the same salary, and ideally, all employment relationships should be maintained. In certain way, the federal government has forbidden to employers to dismiss employees and, of course, to reduce salaries. Nevertheless, in fact, employers, employees, and unions have entered into agreements in order to formalize either the reduction of the base salary, or to use anticipated vacation days and some other measures in order to help the company to pass through this crisis. And of course, to help companies in order to avoid dismissals or downsizing of their operations in Mexico.
Andres,
I must point out that in March 31st, employers filed their annual income tax return and paid annual taxes. So it has been really, really difficult, especially for small and medium-sized companies to solve this situation. Of course, one of the main questions that we receive from our clients is that if the federal government or there any kind of support from the government. Unfortunately, the answer is not from the federal government, with exception of the possibility for small and medium-sized companies to get a credit. But the credit is up to $1,000 US. So as you can imagine, it's almost nothing for this crisis. Nevertheless, good news in certain ways that local governments have put in place some support for employers, especially in connection with payment of payroll tax, which is a local tax. So depending on the location of the company or of the business, it would be possible to get some support, again, from the local governments, from the governors. And well, this is in a very quick and brief summary, the legal situation about COVID. Of course, it is a very complex matter, but but well, we have to respect our time. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Andres. Oscar?
Hello, everyone. Let's have a look at what is going on in Chile. As you might have heard in the news, Chile for some time now passed to stage 4 of this illness, and we have closed all international borders. The government issued a measure called state of catastrophe. This is a constitutional exceptional status, and in and on itself does not have any particular regulation. It's just like an umbrella tool which will allow the government to overlook a certain constitutional rights and, for example, issue measures which may imply closing of business, restriction on the right of people to mobilize themselves, to meet, so on and so forth. And as part of this state of catastrophe, the authority have issued a number of restrictions, and a number of new laws has been published. We will have a quick overview on the main ones, because as you may foresee, there are a number of them. Probably the main restrictions are a curfew that takes place between 10 p.m. and 9 a.m. People cannot go out at night. This is applicable in the whole country. And there are certain permits and certain activities, of course, that are allowed to function during the curfew. Then we have a quarantine, which is a measure basically obliging people to stay at home. This is applicable to certain regions and counties. At present time, most of the counties in the Santiago area, for example, are under this quarantine. Also, there are a number of permits here, as you can imagine, including those which are necessary to, to go to the hospital, to buy in the supermarkets, and you obtain those online. An important detail here is that the permitting for operating during the curfew and the permits to go out during the quarantine are not the same. So if you have one, it doesn't mean that it works for the other situation. The other measures that or restrictions the authority have issued are sanitary border control and health control to get in and out of certain areas in the country. As to the main regulations, there has been 3 big acts passed in the last 6 days. So we have 1 act every 2 days. We have the Telework Act. Telework was in the past permitted, but it was not subject to much detailed regulation. With this act, much more detail on this modality of work has been issued. Then we have a new law titled Protection of the Income Act, which I will not go into much detail here, but basically allows suspension of the employment contract. Employee stops rendering service, employer stop paying remuneration, except for Social Security, but the employee is entitled to claim benefits from unemployment insurance. And last but not least, there is a new act with or contemplating a subsidy to the low income or the very low income and poor people, which is basically funded by the state. This is paid by the state. And as an employer, you only need to inform the employees about the eligibility to apply to this for this law. Probably the most interesting things for today would be what can employers do at the current situation. Probably the first is the suspension of the employment contracts. And this needs to be segregated into the suspension within the previously noted Protection of Income Act, where there is a suspension in case of an act of authority prohibiting or make it impossible the performance of the services. And outside the Protection of the Income Act, the second one would be subject to general rules. It will need the agreement of the parties. However, it has been ruled that if the suspension is with full pay and due to force majeure, the employer cannot provide the work to perform, that suspension could be done unilaterally. Typically, this last scenario would normally fall now within the Protection of Income Act, which, as I mentioned, allows the suspension of the employment contract with access to benefit from the unemployment insurance, despite that the employee is really still employed. Then we have reduction of working schedule and or salary. Again, we can have this within the Protection of the Income Act, which implies a supplement payment from the unemployment insurance. And outside the Protection of the Income Act, this is subject to general rules and requires agreement of the parties, duly documented in an employment contract addendum. Another measure that employers are doing and has been backed by the Labor Board is issuing unilateral collective vacation and agree with the employee and promote with the employee for him or her to take accumulated vacation time. Of course, home office is probably the norm. This can be done by agreement and abiding by the new Telework Act, and also unilaterally where, as I said, when the it has been ruled that if due to a force majeure, the regular way to render the service is impossible, this can be is a measure that can be taken by the employer unilaterally. Workforce reduction, which has not been as drastic as some other countries. For employers making use of the Income Protection Act, those employers may only dismiss for business needs or at will of the employer when that is applicable. Also, this Protection of Employment Act has provided that employment contracts cannot be terminated due to force majeure based on the COVID-19 outbreak. And for the rest, the general rules are still applicable for employment termination, which, as you may know, in Chile requires cause. A very interesting provision of this Protection of Income Act is that the employment terminations that occurred between the time the status of catastrophe was issued and the date in which the law was enacted may be set aside by mutual agreement.
Oscar, just quick, this is your 2-minute warning. Thank you.
Okay, no problem. I am on time. Two more issues relating to medical leaves. Employees who are ill will be subject to medical leave paid by Social Security. The same will apply to employees who are under the suspicious contagion. I mean, people who have had close contact with someone who has been ill. Those guys will be issued a medical leave and paid by Social Security. Persons who may be on preventive quarantine, this would typically be a force majeure situation, and the Protection of Employment Act may apply. And if this is a measure adopted by the company will typically be required to pay remuneration. And last, this is a very recurrent question by employers. You may know that under general rules of the labor code, employees has a right to refuse working when they reasonably consider that there is a serious and imminent risk to the life and health of the employee. Labor authorities have said, a labor board has said that to the extent that the employer is complying with recommendations and measures issued by the authority for the protection of this disease at the workplace, the employee cannot make use of this right. So they need to work. The COVID-19 alone, in general, is not sufficient for employees' refusal to work. So you need an employer that is not taking minimum measures, that has people that are ill inside, the premises, and that kind of situations. And that is all what I have for you today. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Oscar. We're going to try and get back to Renee later, but let's go ahead and move on to Javier Verstegen from Brons y Salas in Argentina. And then once Javier is finished, hopefully Renee's connection has gotten a little stronger and we can attempt to go back to Ecuador. So Javier, please go ahead and take it away.
Thanks, Tim. Hello, everyone. Hope everyone and your families are healthy and safe. Regarding this situation that we currently have, and in order just to summarize the actions adopted by our national government, since beginning of March, the national government issued several decree orders, mainly declaring the health emergency for the period of 1 year. That gives a lot of power to the executive branch to issue resolution during that period. In that regard, our national congresses is not acting for the time being, and since the mid-March, the national government issued different resolutions starting on stages, isolating different groups of individuals, mainly those that has come or travel abroad, risk groups that comprise persons over 60 years old or persons that have specific disease, respiratory, cardiac, etc. And as from March 20, and up to now, next Sunday, April 12th, the national government issued a mandatory lockdown for everyone in Argentina, exception made of certain activities that consider essential, and requesting that those activities implies a minimum circulation of people around the places. That activities mainly refers to public services, governmental authorities, security, food, manufacturing that cannot be stopped, etc. In order to circulate, even though there are some essential activities excluded from the mandatory lockdown, the individuals has to ask for a permission granted by the national authority or specific permissions in case of transportation or communication that has been issued by the competent authority in that field. In principle, as I mentioned, the lockdown will end next Sunday, but the national government already informed that it's going to be extended at least until April 23rd, and some additional activities may be included as exemptions in order to continue performing businesses with some restrictions. The main character adopted by our executive branch is to prevail public health versus any other issue that may be involved in this situation. So business and economy is not a really concern, but for the time being. Regarding labor issues, this mandatory lockdown cannot affect the right of the employees to collect their regular remuneration. Also, and due to some specific circumstances that occurred after March 20th, the executive branch issued a decree prohibiting any kind of dismissals until May 30. The dismissals prohibited by the executive branch are those without cause or alleging force majeure or lack of work. And also the executive branch prohibit the possibility to issue layoff grounded on lack of work or force majeure. The only possibility to implement layoff of personnel is with the agreement of the individuals and or the union that represent the employees and pay a certain amount on non-wages basis, means that that amount would not be subject to tax, to withholdings to the social security system, and for a certain period of time. That amount would be equal to a certain percentage of the remuneration that the employer would be able to collect during the layoff period. Also, in Argentina, we do not have a specific regulation about remote basis work, but only some regulations issued by the work risk superintendents that only provides the obligation on the employer to give the employee that is going to perform home-based work tools that grant a healthy and safety environment during that period. In that regard, that provision has been suspended. So right now, any employer may decide to organize homework basis to its employees during that period. The government is evaluating several benefits to be granted to employees, mainly to small companies with less than 100 employees. That employees would be particularly reduction on the social security dues and contributions, deferrals of payments of social security dues and contributions, and the possibility to obtain a subsidy granted by the national government subject to different conditions and situations. Those benefits has been described in an emergency program issued last week by the national government that is still pending of regulation by the competent authorities. In general terms, any employer in Argentina may have the possibility to start a crisis procedure at the Labor Ministry that requests filing certain documentation that exhibit and support the situation of crisis that the company is alleging. The Labor Ministry will review that documentation and will proceed to appoint a hearing, whereas the company and the union that represent employees will attend in order to discuss further what are the actions that the employer is willing to take what are the scope of such actions, and if in fact there is a crisis or just a temporary situation that will be superseded after the mandatory lockdown decided by the government. Particularly right now, there is no immediate remedy to the situation that the employers are having. So many companies decide to start thinking out if it's possible to reduce salaries to the executive or managerial positions, to reduce work time, or to suspend for a certain period of time benefits granted to its employees that represent saving money for the company. There is also some additional actions adopted by the national government that does not apply to employees, but to persons who are not within the system, means unemployed, pensions per individuals, or persons that already receive social assistance.
Javier, this is your 2-minute warning.
Thank you. In this regard, and many consultations, and we are working with our clients in this, is not only be focus our attention in this particular situation right here, right now, but also to evaluate design plans for the near future, because once the national government is going to close the mandatory lockdown, we have to face a difficult situation, and we have also to work with our employees in order to decrease or manage the drama that COVID-19 has already produced in our conscience. Mainly, you have to take care about healthy and safety regulations and adopt relevant actions in order to create a healthy and safety environment to our employees. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Javier. I received a message from Rene that his connection is restored. So Rene, are you there?
Yes, I am here.
Perfect.
Okay, well, let me start saying that thank you very much for this opportunity, and I am very proud to share that with TerraLex colleagues this webinar. We can start saying that COVID-19 is a virus that changed the way to do business. I think it's important, this phrase, because we get into the situation of the current situation of Ecuador. Last October 2018, Ecuador has a social, political, and economical situation that it was very complaining for the economy, and we is paralyzed about 2 months, 18 days, and after we trying to get oxygen to the economy, COVID-19 comes to Ecuador. So in the 12th of March, the President Moreno took actions and declares the sanitary emergency. And under this current situation that we have, political, economic outlook was already challenging before the pandemic. The crisis will aggravate these trends. The oil prices and the government are weak and have limited fiscal resources. And now we are dealing with this crisis. The situation is very complex for Ecuador. After the declaration of the sanitary emergency by the President Moreno, many of our clients ask frequently questions to deal with this crisis. And most of those questions are, how do I negotiate with my employees the measure that the government take? How to pay the salary of my employees? How to close deal if we cannot sign the agreement? What happened with my cases that are courts? What do I have to refinance my loans? How to pay taxes, etc., etc. Under these frequent questions, I mentioned 4 hot topics and challenges for lawyers in the COVID-19. Then we classify the hot topics in 5 categories. The first one, digital transformation. Second, financial regulation. And 8, third, corporate governance and compliance. 4th, labor law. And 5th, conflicts and litigation. Regarding the first category, digital transformation is something that we already had, but with this crisis, the digital transformation accelerate the process that the companies or our clients get into this matter. So now we are dealing with how to implement chatbot, teleworking at home, how function is the electronic signature, and how start doing smart contracts. The problem is that we can implement those things with the framework legislation that we have at this moment. So we have to be creative to, as a lawyers, trying to put in place all these new digital transformation or these tools into the legislation that we have already. And also how to change the mindset of the clients that is closing agreements by shake hands into a click. So that is something that we are dealing in this crisis and after the crisis. In the financial regulation, governments around the region taking some important measure to minimize the impacts of the crisis in the financial sector, and how this measure can help the business sectors to reinvent their businesses and also keep running the businesses at the same time. And we are dealing with how to renegotiate the loans. We receive many measures with the government saying how to renegotiate the loans, asking for the financial institution to support their clients in giving grace period to pay the debt, allows the banks to support their clients in many things in the financial sector. And also yesterday, the government is taking care about they have a deficit, the fiscal deficit right now in the economy, and how to oxygen the economy. And they ask the authorization from the bonds holder from Ecuador to negotiate with them the payment of interest that comes this month to pay next August. So we are seeing that government are making decision to oxygen the economy, and they also is trying to support the productivity sectors to keep running their business. In the corporate governance and compliance, we see that most of the companies start working in imply corporate governance, and those companies or clients that already take measure in corporate governance are in better position than the others that they don't take this type of measures to confront the crisis. So at this moment, what we see is that heavy structures in some companies create more complicated the situation, and the people who have more agile and flexible structures, they come from in better shape this crisis. In this order, in the compliance, we see that compliance officers are dealing with how to deal with data protection at this moment when most of the workers are doing teleworking at home. We cannot control as all the platform system to connect with the people. So we are dealing with many issues, legal issues that comes every day from our clients in the corporate governance and compliance. Regarding the labor situation, most of the already explaining by my colleagues is the measure that the Ecuadorian government already takes to suspension the work days without salary or with salary, taking vacation in advance, or if you have accumulate vacation, you can take it also, and also how to reduce the work days time. So we are dealing with a very complicated environment in the labor side, and is every day we are dealing with that, and our clients are asking how to apply the decision that the government makes, because some of the wording that they use in their decrees are very complicated and also ambiguous, and they not understand what are the measures at all. So
pardon me, Renee, this is your 2-minute warning.
Okay, and finally, we see that we're going to right now we are seeing high conflicts. The administration of justice is paralyzed at all, and how to resolve the conflictivity among the parties in the labor side or in the commercial side too, how to apply also the force majeure clause, and if I can or if I cannot. So finally, we discussed in the office what is the action plans that we have to take. Well, first of all, we recommend that support our clients as they restart their businesses, supporting the regulation change and taking advantage of this regulation. 2, supporting their restructuring their loans and negotiation with the banks, supporting and giving appropriate advice to help corporations in the labor field, and adopt regulation to get into the digital transformation and avoid conflicts and trying to negotiate. Thank you very much. That's it.
Thank you, Renee. We actually have some questions coming in. First, Andres from Mexico, what are the measures planned to assure businesses continuity, and what are the industry sectors that are be the most affected by the pandemic in Mexico, in your opinion?
Well, the measures have been, well, first of all, home office has become, almost 100% of employees are working, that are able to work under such alternative are working from home. Frankly, what we have been seeing is that employers are organizing by chambers in order to adopt, particular measures depending on each industry. What we have seen from the federal government is we feel like a lack of solidarity with the business sector during this crisis. So, in most of the cases, of course, what companies have been doing is to cut certain expenses, and regarding employees, well, as mentioned earlier, they have decided to enter into agreements to reduce salaries or to adjust certain payments. On the other hand, industry sectors, I must say that the automotive is one of the most damaged by this pandemic. But I would say that all manufacturing sectors, with exception, of course, of certain sectors are essential to face this crisis. But I would say that automotive would be one of the most harmed by this. Also the mining sector. They have been pushing really hard the federal government to issue like a special permission, but they have not gotten that permission so far.
Thank you, Andres. Javier in Argentina, we have a question. What measures have the government taken regarding to tax filings and payments? Have these been deferred or postponed? And what about loan repayment for federal, local government?
Okay, in Argentina, the national government decides to defer the payment of personal taxes for the time being. And today, a resolution from the tax authority deferred the payment on social contributions 3 days only. If any of the employer participates and are eligible to participate in the emergency program, the payment of social contribution to those employers that has been admitted participating in this plan may be deferred at least 3 months. Regarding the loan, the national government addressed a credit line to small companies through the central bank, and also request the private banks to grant loans on a small interest rate to any company only to pay salaries during April and March. Just for your information, the interest rate or the reduced interest rate that these loans are granted is between 24 and 30% annual. And just for your information, the current interest rate out of the COVID-19 is around 70%. That is the only actions that the national government issued right now.
Thank you. And I just want to reassure everyone, we're getting some fantastic questions. All of them will be answered either live or via a response afterwards. So next, for Oscar in Chile, do you see a spike in litigation in the upcoming months, particularly after some companies might invoke force majeure clauses to suspend the performance of contractual obligations?
The new law protection of employment expressly prohibits the termination of employment contracts due to force majeure. So I don't think there's going to be litigation there. It is expressly authorized for employers making use of the law to proceed under termination for business needs, which requires payment of severance. And I don't believe that, I mean, business needs have always been subject to litigation, but I think the COVID-19, if it's not force majeure because it's been forbidden, basically, it would, in most cases, clearly fall or be grounds to support a termination for business needs. As I mean, some employers, some businesses have suffered more, some less, but nobody, very few has gotten a free ride here. So probably there may be, I foresee more litigation arising out of this law concerning the protection of minimum income. That is so far, this is a 24-page law. It's full of dark sections and ambiguities. There's a new law being discussed at the Congress to make clarifications because there is room there for controversy. There are certain incompatibilities between employers who have reached agreements to suspend the employment contracts with the employees. With pay, those would be excluded from the law, but then there's other section of the law which would seem to not to exclude those employees. And the thing there is that for an employer, if by a wrong interpretation stops paying Social Security, for example, it may later on backfire in terms of creating a nullity of dismissals. I mean, I don't think that there's going to be a particularly increase in litigation because of the COVID. It may be an increase in litigation because of the number of terminations and measures adopted by the employers. It's more in terms of numbers that in terms of reasons, if I can use that distinction.
Great. So an additional question here for actually the entire panel, but let's go ahead and start with Renee. So our international organizations, or actually Renee, you can probably answer for the entire region. So our international organizations like the International Monetary Fund, European Central Bank, and the World Bank offering to help supply loans and cash flow to the economies during the crisis. Are any of you hearing that? Renee, let's begin with you.
Yes, I hear you. So, in the case of Ecuador, we already asked for emergency loans to multilaterals, and also we are starting renegotiating the loans that the government already has. And last week we pay one of the loans to get more loans to inject to the economy, because if we don't have these emergency lines of credit to Ecuador, we don't going to reactivate the economy as soon as we want. So I think that is in the same shape of most of the emerging countries in Latin America, because most of them are already being in emerging years of sluggish growth, and also we have failing reforms and social instability. And as you know, Chile, Ecuador, Brazil, and other countries already has a very important economic crisis and social and political in October 2018. So we need to 2019. So we need to move forward, because if we don't get the loans from the multilaterals and they don't understand what are the situation economically to the region, we're going to be in a very worse situation for the next future. Thank you.
So a quick question from Roberto Lisagang from our member firm, Motor Fernandez in Brazil. In your jurisdictions, are all levels of government, federal, state, municipal, aligned with the measures that are being implemented, or are there any conflict of laws among these levels? And then I would imagine the question is, what recommendations would you have and how do you see a way forward? Let's begin with Andres.
Yes, I mean, we certainly see that there will be conflict of laws, or there are conflicts of laws. Also, I also must say that all the, all the courts, even the federal courts, are closed. So right now it's like a twilight zone here in Mexico, because yes, actually there are conflict of laws. There are laws that are issued by, in parallel by federal, local, and municipality governments that are not consistent at all between each others. So what we anticipate is a lot of appeals, amparo lawsuits, and some other legal means in order to try to get clarity and also to challenge decisions. It is supposed that all the judicial system entirely will resume activities on April 30th, but we have to wait if there is not a new decision from the federal government to extend the period of suspension of activities.
A really good question that just came in. So the region has become dependent on Chinese exports and loans. Is there an expectation of pulling back from this dependency given the impact of COVID-19? Let's begin with Javier.
Based upon information and the media that inform in that regard, the answer would be no. That we are not discussing about cutting importations from China in this particular scenario. Even though, remember that the mandatory lockdown already includes certain activities and only import and export activities are excluded in case of essential situations.
Oscar, would you like to comment?
On the let me address quickly this conflict of law issues first. We have central government here, so not being a federal state, the room is not much. However, we have had problems with city mayors ordering things and requesting measures that are not in line with the government. Those conflicts are being set aside by the general controllership, and for the most part, the majors have been losing. In connection with China, I mean, Chile is highly dependent on selling copper to them. I don't see any restriction of foreign trade with China as part of the equation to get out of the situation. I don't see how it could benefit really.
Good question just came in as well. So in the US, we've seen direct financial assistance, either low interest loans as low as 1% or loans with no obligation to repay from our federal government to small businesses to ensure continuity of employment and business operations. Is that something that you've seen in your jurisdictions? Let's begin with Andres.
Yes, I mean, unfortunately, not from the federal government. As I said, there is just a program for small and medium-sized companies, but it is, I mean, they are able to get a loan, but the loan is, sorry, but it could be ridiculous. It's only up to 25,000 pesos, which is around $1,000 US dollars. What the banking is, we are still waiting for more programs from private sector, but what the banking, what they are doing is to postpone payments of credits without any kind of penalty from 1 up to 4 months, such as credit cards or other kind of financing. But this is only what we have seen so far, but not from the federal government. According to the philosophy of the federal government, in this time, on this occasion, the federal government will not take the burden from employers and from the private sector. The private sector has to solve this by their own means.
Javier, any comments?
Again, as I mentioned, the national government has extended a credit line to small companies through the central bank and ordered the private banks to grant loans on a specific interest rate. Apart from that, the only lines of credits or benefits granted by the national government are only on individual basis to unemployed, retirees, or persons that need social assistance.
Fantastic. We've gone a little bit over time, and I want to be respectful of everyone's schedule. So I thank you all very much for participating today. We had a few outstanding questions, and what we will do is submit those answers electronically to all of the attendees. So we had around 170 or 180, I'm sorry, registered to attend today's program. So we will share the slides as well as these questions and answers that we both did live, as well as those that we weren't able to get to today. So this program is fantastic. So I believe we might want to look at doing this on a monthly basis moving forward for the region. So thank you so much for all of your time today. And any additional questions, please, again, my email address is tshannon, TSHANNON, @terralex.org. And I can pose those questions to our panelists as well as any other member firm in our network. Again, we have representation in almost 120 countries around the world, and there are not many jurisdictions we can't get to. So please, again, send any questions that you might have, and I'll make sure that they get answered. Thank you so much. Have a great day, and stay safe. Thank you.
Thank you.
So much.
Bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.